King Richard III.
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 Archaeologists behind the discovery of King Richard III's remains under a car park in Leicester, well, they were back at the site today to begin work on another new dig.
Getting DNA out of ancient remains is a very tricky and long-winded process.
In 2012, archaeologists made headlines when they discovered a skeleton beneath a Leicester parking lot. By 2014, DNA testing confirmed the impossible. They'd found King Richard III, missing for over 500 years. The world celebrated. But what they didn't tell you was that the same DNA test revealed something so disturbing, so politically explosive, that scientists quietly buried it in the footnotes of their research paper. For a decade, that secret sat hidden in plain sight. Until now. New findings in 2025 have finally exposed what really happened. And the truth isn't just shocking, it rewrites everything we thought we knew about the Wars of the Roses, the legitimacy of medieval kingship, and one of history's most brutal conflicts. The king under the parking lot. It sounds like the setup to a bad joke, a king buried under a parking lot. But for 527 years, that's exactly where King Richard III lay forgotten. Richard was the last English king to die in battle, struck down at Bosworth Field in 1485. His victorious enemies, the Tudors, wanted to humiliate him one final time. They paraded his naked corpse through the streets of Leicester, slung over a horse like a sack of grain. The message was clear: this dynasty is finished. He was buried hastily in an unmarked grave at Greyfriars Church. Decades later, during the Reformation, the church was demolished. The land was sold, paved over, and lost to history. Legends claimed his bones were dug up and thrown into the River Soar. Most historians assumed he was gone forever. That is, until screenwriter Philippa Langley became obsessed with finding him. She spent years studying medieval maps, overlaying old Leicester with the modern city. Her research kept pointing to one unlikely spot, a mundane city council parking lot. Everyone told her she was wasting her time. The experts said he was in the river, but she convinced the University of Leicester to take a chance.
Difficult seeing him laid out like this. Gus, I'm sorry, I can't.
In August 2012, they broke ground. On the very first day, they found human leg bones. What emerged from the earth was extraordinary. Skeleton 1, as they called it, was a man in his early 30s, buried in a grave too short for his body, forcing his head into an awkward position. This wasn't the burial of a beloved king. It was the hasty work of enemies. The skeleton bore 10 wounds, 8 to the skull. This wasn't death by random arrow. This was a brutal personal killing. 2 wounds were fatal. One, a sword strike to the base of the skull. Another, a halberd thrust straight through the top of his head. This was a man surrounded, unhorsed, and finished off in a frenzy. But the detail that made archaeologists' hearts race was the spine. The skeleton had severe scoliosis, a pronounced sideways curve that would have made one shoulder sit higher than the other. For centuries, Tudor propaganda had depicted Richard as a poisonous bunchback toad. The bones proved it was an exaggeration based on a real condition. Isotope analysis of the teeth revealed a diet rich in seafood and wine, the expensive fare of high-status individuals. Everything pointed to one conclusion: they'd found him. Still, they needed absolute proof. They needed DNA, the perfect match and the impossible break. Getting usable DNA from 500-year-old bones is extraordinarily difficult. Ancient DNA degrades, shattering into fragments. It's easily contaminated by a single skin cell or stray hair from anyone who touches it. Dr. Turi King's team worked in sterile conditions, drilling into the king's tooth and femur to extract genetic material. Their goal: find a living relative and match the DNA. Here's where it gets fascinating. Most DNA gets shuffled every generation, making it useless for tracing specific lineages across centuries. But there are 2 exceptions. First is mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. It passes unchanged from mother to all her children, creating an unbroken genetic signature through the maternal line. Richard had no surviving children, but he had an older sister, Anne of York. Genealogists traced Anne's female lineage through 17 generations to 2 living descendants, Michael Ibsen, a Canadian furniture maker in London, and Wendy Doldig. When they compared the skeleton's mtDNA to Michael Ibsen's, it was a perfect match. The specific haplogroup they shared is rare, found in only a tiny fraction of Europeans. The odds of coincidence were astronomical. In February 2013, the University of Leicester announced their triumph. The skeleton was beyond reasonable doubt King Richard III. The world celebrated. But the scientists had another test to run. The Y chromosome passes exclusively from father to son, creating a paternal family signature. The team tracked down male line descendants of Edward III, Richard's great-great-grandfather. If the Y chromosomes matched, it would be the final proof. The results came back. Total mismatch. Not even close. Somewhere in the 19 generations separating Richard III from his modern relatives, someone's father wasn't who history said he was. This was hard scientific proof of a hidden royal scandal. The DNA had proven a lie. But where did it happen? The buried truth. The Y chromosome results sent shockwaves through the historical community. This wasn't just palace gossip. It had earth-shattering implications. The entire Plantagenet claim to the throne was based on an unbroken father-to-son bloodline, supposedly ordained by God. The DNA proved that bloodline was not pure. So, where did the break occur? That was the million-dollar question. The 2014 research paper, published in Nature Communications, presented two possibilities with equal weight. Possibility 1. The break happened after Richard III, somewhere in the 500-year line of Somerset descendants. This was the safe explanation. It would be a minor scandal for one noble family, nothing more. Possibility 2. The break happened before Richard III. This would mean Richard himself, or his father, or his brother King Edward IV, had no legitimate blood claim to the throne they fought for. It would mean the entire Wars of the Roses was a brutal 30-year conflict based on a genetic lie. The 2014 team concluded they couldn't pinpoint where the break occurred. The science wasn't advanced enough. They presented both possibilities as equally likely, effectively softening the blow, burying the lead. This vagueness allowed the world to focus on the good news. We found the king, and treat the Y chromosome mismatch as a quirky, unsolvable footnote. But the truth was far more disturbing than anyone admitted, and the technology to prove it was just a decade away. The 2025 bombshell. For 10 years, the royal scandal sat as history's hottest cold case. Then, in 2025, new technology finally caught up. An independent team at the University of Leicester, working with geneticists from Harvard and the Max Planck Institute, launched the Royal Bloodline Genomic Reanalysis Project. They used cutting-edge long-read sequencing methods that could analyze massive unbroken DNA strands, not just tiny fragments. They needed more data points. Richard's Y chromosome was different from the modern Somersets, but they didn't know which was the true Plantagenet line. To solve this, they needed an ancient control sample. They obtained permission from Westminster Abbey to sample the tomb of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, son of Edward III. John of Gaunt died before any suspected break could have occurred. His DNA would be the Rosetta Stone. The results were a bombshell. First, deep analysis proved with 99.9% certainty that the Somerset family's Y chromosome line was unbroken back to the 15th century. The break wasn't on their side. Then John of Gaunt's Y chromosome was tested. It perfectly matched the modern Somersets. This was the smoking gun. The Somerset line was the true original Plantagenet bloodline. Therefore, the different Y chromosome, Richard III's, meant the break had to have happened in Richard's immediate family tree. The 2025 study didn't just suggest this, it proved it. The false paternity event occurred between Richard's grandfather and Richard himself. The spotlight fell on one man, Richard, Duke of York, Richard III's father. Suddenly, a 500-year-old rumor clicked into place. The lie that built a dynasty. During the Wars of the Roses, enemies of the House of York spread a vicious rumor. They claimed Richard, Duke of York, wasn't the son of his supposed father. They claimed his mother, Cecily Neville, had an affair while her husband was away at war. They even named the supposed father, a handsome English archer named Blayborn. At the time, this was dismissed as political mudslinging, a nasty story to weaken the Yorkist claim. But the 2025 DNA analysis proves that rumor was almost certainly true. Richard, Duke of York, the man who started the Wars of the Roses by claiming his blood was purer than the king's, was illegitimate. Let that sink in. If the Duke of York had no legitimate claim, then neither did his children. His son, King Edward IV, the charismatic warrior who seized the throne, had no genetic right to it. Edward's sons, the tragic princes in the Tower, were illegitimate heirs, and Richard III himself, who famously claimed the throne by declaring his nephews illegitimate, was also illegitimate. The entire House of York, the White Rose faction that waged a 30-year war, was built on a fundamental genetic lie. The Wars of the Roses tore England apart. The body count reached tens of thousands. Entire noble families were wiped out. At the Battle of Towton, more men died in a single day than in any other English battle. It was all fought over nothing. This brutal, bloody family feud between the Lancasters and the Yorks over who had the true claim to the throne, the DNA confirms the Yorks had no claim at all. This is the disturbing discovery that was so delicately buried in the 2014. It wasn't just a random break, it was the break that mattered most, the one that delegitimized an entire chapter of history. The questions that keep us awake. The 2025 discovery hasn't just closed a case, it's blown the doors wide open for even wilder theories. What if Cecily Neville knew? The official story has her husband away on campaign when she conveniently gives birth to a son. But what if this was calculated deception? Some historians now seriously consider the peasant bassinet theory. What if she simply acquired a healthy baby from a servant or peasant and passed it off as her own? In this version, Cecily Neville isn't a passive victim. She's a calculating political mastermind who single-handedly set the stage for the entire war with one desperate lie. What if King Edward IV knew? His brother Richard famously claimed Edward had signed a pre-contract of marriage to Lady Eleanor Butler before marrying Elizabeth Woodville, making Edward's children illegitimate. For centuries, everyone assumed this was propaganda Richard invented to justify his power grab. But what if it was true? What if Edward, knowing his bloodline was worthless, desperately tried to marry into powerful families to weld his line to anyone with legitimate blood? This reframes his entire reign, the wild partying, the obsession with public image, as an elaborate distraction. What if Richard III was the only one who didn't know? Imagine Richard, the devoted younger brother who idolized his glorious older brother Edward and believed in the House of York. Then somehow, a deathbed confession, a hidden letter, a whispered rumor, he discovers the entire thing is a lie. This opens the possibility that Richard III wasn't simply a power-hungry tyrant. He was a man who had his entire worldview shattered. What if the removal of the princes in the tower wasn't just a power grab? What if it was a desperate, twisted attempt to cleanse a bloodline he'd just discovered was fraudulent? He saw his nephews not as rivals, but as living proof of his family's lie. Perhaps he thought he had to erase them, not just to get the crown, but to fix the unfixable. The truth they tried to erase. This is why the 2014 discovery was so carefully revised. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was explosive. It questioned the legitimacy of the entire York dynasty, and by extension, the Tudor dynasty that followed. The scientists in 2014 knew what they'd found. They just couldn't prove which side of the family tree held the break. So they presented both possibilities equally, made it sound uncertain, made it safe. They let the world celebrate finding a king, while quietly noting a genealogical complication in the footnotes. But they knew. And now, 11 years later, with technology they could only dream of in 2014, we know too. The DNA doesn't lie. Richard, Duke of York, was illegitimate. His sons had no claim. The Wars of the Roses were fought over nothing. And one of history's most brutal conflicts was built on a genetic falsehood that no one dared to speak aloud for 500 years. The king they found in the parking lot? He wasn't really a king at all, at least not by the very rules he lived and died by. That's the disturbing truth they tried to erase. And now, in 2025, it's finally come out.